Hey there, students. Mr. Wolf here. Now that we've had a chance to take a look at some of the reasons for independent reading and developing that habit and that skill, we're going to talk about different ways to access independent novels, as we are dealing with a slightly different time and different context when it comes to access points. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. Um, Right off the bat, there's a couple of a variety of different quotes here, kind of promoting reading and how important that is. And this is by no means exhaustive when it comes to the um, uh, the the different views people have on reading. But I want to point out a couple of them. One of which is Mark Twain's pretty famous quote: "A person who won't read has no advantage over one who can't." Something to consider. When you think of like what would life be like going through if like I was illiterate and couldn't read and I didn't have access to information. Um, and then this one that's very telling by Frederick Douglass. He says, once you learn to read, you will be forever free. Now, if you know anything about Frederick Douglass, he was an escaped slave in the 1800s who um, became an orator and a fighter not only for emancipation of slaves, but also for women's rights. And he became an advisor for President Lincoln during the Civil War. So this was a man who worked his way up from slavery, and he attributed literally his life. He attributed it to learning to read and having access to knowledge and learning, and he leveraged that to ultimately be an example and to speak about the atrocities of slavery, among other things. So, yeah, a lot of other stuff. Now, if you want other data, here's another thing to look at. How much reading, even 20 minutes a day. Now, if you think about it, 20 minutes ain't really that long. That's definitely a window of time that you can access reading, even if you're doing that for, I don't know, maybe that's what, 5 more minutes than it takes to eat breakfast. I don't know. Maybe I'm a slow chewer. I'm sorry. Anyway, but it's saying that we'll be exposed to 1.8 million words per year and scores a 90th percentile on standardized tests. Now, those 1.8 million words probably aren't all unique, but there are definitely a lot of words that you do encounter, and it does build your vocabulary. It builds your own language skills. And among other things. So it definitely pays dividends, and I will say that most of the wealthy people that you hear about, the Bill Gates and so on, those guys are constantly reading and frequently using that knowledge they gain from that to try and change the world and ultimately become more successful in what they do. Now, how to choose the right book? A couple things to consider here. There are lots of different kinds of books out there. There are lots of different genres out there to choose from. So don't find yourself limited by a certain genre. But when you consider the text, a couple things to keep in mind is that it's something that is interesting to you. One of the things I know that has been really helpful for students who are reluctant readers is to find a book that is in a series. That's one you've heard but you haven't necessarily picked up. Because that tends to those texts tend to be very engaging, especially if you're a reluctant reader. So make sure that it is something that is interesting to you, and you'll have to read the summaries and figure out what texts, when you think you've got a series you want to read or something like that. Make sure it's one that you haven't read before. Obviously, we want something that's new. While rereading a text is helpful, it doesn't necessarily expand your knowledge and that empathy, if you will. So make sure it's at the right reading level for you, not something that's too high or too low. We're not reading Dr. Seuss here, while there are merits of Dr. Seuss at certain levels, not necessarily at 8th grade. That is an age-appropriate text as well, and also not being read at another level in school. So if you're going, well, I just looked up what was being read in 9th grade, and I'm just going to read all that stuff. Like that, the purpose isn't just to do that. Those are things you're going to be reading at some point in an academic setting. And honestly, a lot of the times when students do that, they kind of sabotage themselves, thinking, well, I've read it, so I don't need to again. And then when it counts, they get a bad grade. So I would definitely stick to something, again, that's interesting you. Make this something less academic and more for entertainment and more for pleasure. Okay, and yes, you can apply certain skills we're learning, but we don't want this to just simply be an intellectual activity, okay? Now, where to get books? Local library. They do curbside pickup. Many of them are doing curbside pickup right now. Amazon, bookstores, thrift stores. Thrift stores are one of my favorite places. I buy a ton of books for my kids there. And honestly, you tend to find a lot of popular stories there, because those are the texts that a lot of people are actually buying. They read through it a couple times and they pass it around and ends up thrift stores. So that's definitely an option. Curbside checkout from your homeschool may also be an option here, upcoming, a little bit more on that later, and then little free libraries near you. Now, there's a variety of book trailers here that might spark your interest, and when you're doing your research, definitely make sure that you are, looking up, any reviews. You can go on YouTube, and there will be people who talk about it, or even looking at the reviews on Amazon and what people said about it. You can get a lot of information there, and especially if you're going to invest some time, it's worth a couple minutes to do that. So you can look at those. There's links to there. Now, digital resources for books. There's a lot of them out there. There's audio books. There's the ebooks and things like that if you happen to have an e-reader. So we'll look at that a little bit. Now, a couple of them is Why Should I Read Next? That's a book based on books that you've read before. A book at my Lexile. Now, Lexile is kind of like the vocabulary and the word choice and sentence structure of a book. And you want to make sure that it's one that's comfortable to you, right? I mean, maybe stretches a little bit, but not too far, right? So if you have a book that's like, wow, this is really complicated language and I don't understand and I have to reread it a bunch of times, that's not going to be pleasurable. It's not going to be fun. You don't want to read that book. You want to read a book that's going to be kind of in your wheelhouse, and we're not looking to stretch you here. That's what the academic stuff is for, right? So you can find that out if you're interested in your Lexile. You can ask me. Your MAPS test has your Lexile levels, and that's pretty good gauge for it. So hey, look, there was value there in that. Now, Scholastic Lexile Finder also helps you with those texts, and then there's the PDSD library catalog, okay? So there are other digital resources. These are some that you can click on that will give you free access to digital texts that you can download and access that way. And there are even more. How about that? Now, these are all ones where you're dealing with like mostly public domain texts. They're all maybe older texts, not necessarily invalid, right? Some of those older texts are amazing, but you can look at those. LibriVox also has free audiobooks, and there's also ways to find audiobooks in different resources. Sometimes YouTube and so on has those as well. But of course, yeah, there's a whole bunch of them out there. So some of my favorite books, or at least ones that I've heard of, or that have been well received by students. Some of them I have read, some I haven't. I have read Fault in Our Stars, and it was an amazing book. And we've been familiar with John Green. We've heard of him before, right? Because he was the guy talking about authorial intent and so on. Very engaging text, a little bit erudite, a little bit fancy in language, but definitely an interesting storyline. Ender's Game, a little bit of sci-fi. By all means, sci-fi is a valid genre to look at. I gobbled up a lot of sci-fi when I was a middle schooler, and Arthur C. Clarke and the 2001 series and so on. So yeah, definitely take a look at that. Dune's a great one as well. Secret Life of Bees, Walk Two Moons by Sharon Creech. Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants series has been a really, really popular one as well. And then a bunch of other awesome texts. Some I've read, some of them I'm familiar with. Five People You Meet in Heaven, if you know anything about Mitch Albom, he's got some fascinating. Tuesdays is Morrie's a great one. Once and Future King, T.H. White. That's really more of the whole set of stories on the King Arthur legend. So you can just read, I suppose, The Sword and the Stone. That's kind of the first one, obviously. And a whole bunch of them here. So those are all options for you, and this is not exhaustive at all. You can definitely take a look at other book lists and so on to choose this. Make sure again that it is parent approved and that you've done a little research and you're feeling good about it. You maybe thumb through a couple of pages so you know what you're into, and we'll go from there. Okay, and then you'll be filling out the rest of that form, and we will be off to the races. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.